Good morning, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Coffee Break with Card, La Hora del Cafecito's new sister show. My name is Lourdes Quinones, and I would like to welcome you to the new show, Coffee Break with Card. Coffee Break with Card is a program dedicated to all those in our community who are living with autism, to their family members, and to all those who support them. So come on in, join us, and let us know in the comment section if you're drinking a cup of coffee with us. We'd love to say hello to you. In today's program, we are happy to welcome Stacey Hoaglund, an education advocate and president of Autism Society of Florida, who will be sharing information regarding educational rights, as well as answering our questions related to different data sources that can be helpful in creating individual educational plans or IEPs. So join us. We have a lot to talk about. My mouth is a little bit dry this morning, so you have to excuse me. Okay, so let's start out by introducing to you our coffee break hostesses of today. As I mentioned, my name is Lourdes Quinones. I am a CARD consultant assigned to the primary age group, as well as professionally, I am a pediatric physical therapist and a special education teacher. I am joined by my colleagues, Olivia McDonald. Buenos dias, Olivia.
Buenos dias, Lourdes.
And Maggie Aldana. Buenos dias, Maggie.
Buenos dias, Lourdes.
Olivia McDonald is an excellent professional in the field of public health. She is a CARD consultant assigned to the primary age group, just like me. And Olivia is the mother of a beautiful baby boy and has a younger brother diagnosed with autism. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you, Lourdes.
And Maggie Aldana is a special education teacher and a previous chair of CARD in the constituency board here at CARD, and is the mother of 3 children, 2 of whom are diagnosed with autism. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you, Lourdes.
We have with us also Stacey Hoaglund. I'd like to say good morning to her. Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And Jasmine Castellano could not join us today, but she'll be back for the next episode. I'm sure she's around here somewhere. So hi, Jasmine. Anyway, before we get started, we'd like to review the rules by which we want to adhere before we get started to make sure that we have a safe environment for all of us. Remember to keep an open mind and maintain a positive attitude and use respectful language. Bueno, again, like I mentioned before, in today's program, we will be talking to Stacey Hoaglund, education advocate and president of Autism Society of Florida, who will be sharing with us important information regarding educational rights, as well as answering our questions related to different data sources that can be helpful when creating individual educational plans or IEPs. All right, so join us. We have a lot to talk about, okay? So let's get started because there's a lot of content. So Stacey, our first question to you comes from me, and it's, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me. I always love the opportunity to be able to talk to other families. You know, they're kind of following a similar path. No two paths are the same, of course, but it's always great to talk to families about where they're at and hopefully give them some help on how to get to the next step. So I am foremost a parent of a young man who's actually not so young anymore. He's 27. So the older he gets, the older I feel. He was diagnosed at the age of 2.5, but sadly, that really came through advocacy. Like many families still today, all these years later, you know, we often get that our pediatrician telling us, you know, don't compare him to his brother or his sister. Boys mature later than girls, you know, and it was a friend actually who said to me, I think you need to seek some other advice. And so my pediatrician did give me a referral to a neurologist, and within about 5 minutes, we had a diagnosis. Of course, now knowing what I know about autism, it would not have been difficult for me to have recognized it had I known then what I know now. But at the time, that was a huge challenge. And I know that some families today are still going through that. So I always encourage families that if you see that there is some lagging with social skills or communication, early intervention is great for everybody. So I always tell everybody, just seek it out because it's going to be good all the way around. So then what happened was, as soon as I got his diagnosis, I was like, okay, what do we do? What's the next step? And so I joined a bunch of parent groups, which is like so amazing for me because they really became my tribe. And they were advocating for better education, better services, better healthcare. And so when he was about 4 years old, I was sitting at one of those committee meetings, and there was a woman there who was the director of Family Network on Disabilities of Broward County. And she asked me afterwards if I would be interested in a job. And at first I said, no, I'm a mom. I'm just doing the mom thing. And she said, no. It'll just be a couple hours a week because I really see your passion. And I'm wondering if you would be interested in becoming an advocate. I still was like, I don't think so. But she said, oh, no, it's just a couple hours a week. Well, you know how that goes. They tell you it's a few hours a week. And then before you knew it, it was a lot of hours a week. But I was so fortunate because it was something I could do while my kids were at school. So that was just, I've been doing it for 23 years. So that was really a godsend. And the beautiful thing about working for Family Network on Disabilities of Broward is we are publicly funded. So we're able to help families who would never be able to afford a private advocate. So it's just it's like a gem in my community, which I just really love.
Yeah.
And I got involved with the Autism Society of Broward County at the time, and then eventually the Autism Society of Florida, which I'm now the president of. In 2006, I went through the Florida Partners in Policymaking program. And then about 8 years ago, I was asked to run it. And so as I do that, I get to the support of the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council, who fully funds the program. And I get to work with an advisory committee on creating and just amazing advocacy and leadership training program for those who are self-advocates as well as family members, and teaching people how to make systems change. And so that's just been, a really huge opportunity and something that we're really fortunate to have here in Florida for the families that we serve. And then there's a bunch of other committees that I sit on, but anything that I think helps people with whatever their challenge might be, to be able to help them define who they are and not have other people try to define them. And that's usually where you can find me.
Nah, nothing, just a tiny little thing you do. when you're good at what you do, right?
Well, when you're passionate, I think that that's it. Is I've had people like through partners class who come in and they're like, oh, I don't know all this stuff. I feel like I have to know all this stuff. But when you have a personal story and you can share that with other people, I think that your light comes out. But I also think that you're able to help so many people who really, they need support more than anything else. That it's the stuff I think that we kind of get stuck on is you have to know this and this and this, but really just gotta just love on yourself and your kids, and I think the rest will kind of come.
Okay. So the next question I have for you, Stacey, is do you recommend parents collect their own data at home?
Yes. So I am like a data queen. I think that data is really important. And that probably came out because when my son was very young, we started what we used to call, and kind of I still hear it a little bit, a home program. So I had different therapists coming in and out of my house. Well, I'm calling them therapists, but they weren't technically therapists. They were teachers, teachers' aides, teachers' assistants. And I went and got a lot of information on how to kind of create a fun and interactive home program. And so I really developed it. And then I would have the girls, because they were young women, come in and basically play with him. It was always child directed. It was always, looking at what were the skills that he needed to move forward. And we would not most certainly have been able to get him to where my son is amazing. I could say it's his mom. But without the data, we would have been in a predicament. So yes, I do think that parents need to gather their own data. I think that if you're homeschooling, that you definitely need to keep data. I think if you send your kids to school, you need to keep data. Oftentimes, I will find that parents, when they do ask the school for data, a lot of times it's not accessible, easily accessible. And so a parent isn't really sure, is their child making progress or they're not? And a lot of times when it comes to like the IEP, right? On the IEP, I always tell every parent, look at last year's IEP, because if the data is there, they should be able to kind of look at this year's and last year's. But I do think that parents need to have their own data, because how are you going to know if your kid is making progress or they're not? It's if you don't have the data to support what you're doing, it's what I call throwing darts in the dark. Like maybe it's going to hit really good right there in the center, and maybe it's just going to bounce off the wall and hit the floor.
And I think an important point to make here for parents to realize is that it's not only about knowing where their child is, it's also to justify the services, not only in school, but I'm talking about private therapy as well. So it's knowing if those minutes are getting bumped down, for example, or bumped, they need to be bumped up for whatever reason, then you have the proof. So it's like, okay, we need more minutes because of this. So you can't ask for minutes if you don't have proof, or certain therapies if you don't have proof. So for example, if you want occupational therapy because the child doesn't know XYZ, as a physical therapist, I can say, well, you can't ask for occupational therapy if you don't have proof that your child can't do X, Y, or Z, right? But if you can show that the child is having trouble in the area of fine motor because of these findings, then the insurance companies, for example, will have to pay for those services because there is proof. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I've had a lot of parents contact me about, like healthcare. So the insurance outside, for private therapies, where they're having to appeal, what the insurance company had said because they've been denied whatever.
Mhm.
And then I'll say, okay, but what was the report that your provider submitted to insurance? And when I look at it, a lot of times it says, oh, kid's doing great. Look at all these great things that are happening.
Yeah.
And I'll tell the parent, well, that's why, because the challenges that you see on a daily basis are not indicated in this report.
Yeah.
And
I didn't want to put that.
If I was
too
the
much.
insurance company, I would do the same thing,
Yeah.
right? And so, yes, the data is, it's important for so many different things.
Yeah.
And yes, it's with your private providers that you're using at home. It's if you're doing like a home program, if you're sitting and you're helping your kid with their homework, if their studies, you got to know where they're at so that you can take those incremental steps. I just want to add one thing. When my son was little, and I don't even know that I remember what it stands for. Maybe one of you guys do, but we use the ABLES. Anybody remember the ABLES? So the Applied Behavior Language Learning, or something like that system. I can't even remember. It was old. It was old when I used it. Somebody had given me a copy of it. It was like this thick, and they put it in this binder. And it really goes. So for any of you guys who are listening, you could do it easy. Google and see ABLES. I think it's ABLLS, I think. But it is really like scaffolding, like a skill. It'll tell you, I don't know, colors with crayons, or identifies colors. And then it will, once the child can do that, then it takes you to the next level and the next level and the next level. It was a wonderful tool for a mom that knew nothing about that when I started. And I was able to track his progress. I was able to develop the home program that we had around it. And it was just, because sometimes, we really need some type of pathway, because, when you're not from this world of education or therapeutic intervention, which I was not, it could be very daunting, scary, and confusing. And so I like things that just sort of put the pathway out there, and then you choose if you want to follow it, if you want to skip some of those stones, or maybe there's a stone you need to stand on for a while because it's not happening. Maybe you need to regroup and take another pathway. But I just like those kind of tools.
Maggie?
Thank you so much for the information, Stacey. And when you refer to data, what information can parents collect at home that would be helpful for an IEP team?
Well, I can certainly speak for myself that there were many days that I was sitting at the dining room table helping him with his schoolwork. Um, even though he and many other kids have really positive outcomes to school, kids with autism sometimes are very overwhelmed by the very nature of a classroom. And so I wasn't there with him. So I didn't really know how much is he paying attention and how much is he so distracted by everything else that's going on around him. So for me, that type of data was really important because I wasn't in the classroom, didn't know what was happening. And so by sitting there with him and working, and again, I realized that that is a luxury that I had because I worked when the kids were at school. So I was able to sit. Not every parent can do that. So I get that. So if you are a parent that works full time, like all day, kids go to childcare and you just don't have time to work with them, you could just do like if you can spend 15 or 20 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, just kind of read with them. There are all kinds of leveled readers. You can ask your teachers to send some of those home. It's really great. Schools should have data sheets. So I have never heard of a teacher when a parent says, "Can I get a data sheet so I can use for my home use?" Yeah, I've never heard a teacher say no. So those are really great tools. So you can use those. They're usually pretty simple to follow, and teachers are great at being able to help parents figure out, okay, what do I do with this data sheet? Now I used and depended upon a daily home note. I am a bit of a stickler for that, especially at the elementary ages for kids. I created my own home note. Because a lot of times, I'm sure there's a lot of parents out there who get a daily home note that has a bunch of smiley face stamps on it. That was not going to be good enough for me. I didn't want that. I wanted to know when he was on the playground, did he initiate play with peers? And I made it as simple as I could. So say it was initiated play with peers on playground with prompt and without prompt. And what they had to do was circle one because he was expected, that was a goal on his IEP. He was expected to do that every day. And so sometimes I'm sure he needed a prompt and sometimes he didn't. So all he would have to do was circle it because, teachers don't have a lot of time to fill out a bunch of stuff on the home notes. So I would kind of set it up that way with whatever that statement was, and then with prompt, without prompt. And then, I would have a couple lines at the bottom. Teacher could fill in if something really great happened or if something not so great happened that she felt like I needed to know about. And because I am passionate about inclusion, most of my son's education was spent in regular education with support. He had an aide all through elementary school that was in the class because he was in there. Classroom wouldn't have one if he wasn't. There, from year to year, there might be other students who could also benefit from the paraprofessional in the room, but he needed that. And even having the paraprofessional, I knew that a general education teacher who had 18 to 25 students was not going to be able to sit and keep a lot of data. I mean, that's just reality. And I couldn't expect the teacher assistant who was helping him to also sit down and gather a lot of data. So I used, and so did my teacher, use those daily home notes because they were created in such a way that we could, all of us, me, the teacher, and the parent could look back to see, okay, how was this past month? And so I think that those are great. I also
I was going to say they probably loved you because they can use them. Yeah.
And for some of the kids, and my son didn't need this because I think that I had really, knock on wood, I had good relationships with his middle and high school. But I have a lot of students where we create a contract, and we want to teach the student to be as self-directed as they can. So the student is part of developing the contract, sort of like what I'm working on today. And it's a
Mhm.
team approach with the student. And it's really an effort to help that kid understand, regardless of who the student is or what their apparent capabilities are, being able to understand that I'm my own person and that I want to be able to participate in my IEP meetings. I want to know what my accommodations are and so forth. So those daily contracts are really helpful too. And the teachers would initial it. And so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
And so I think that, those kind of things are great. I just, you know, we have progress reports that come out quarterly. They're supposed to come out with the report cards. I don't really look at those as being data. Um, it's, I guess, good information. It's only about goals because a lot of parents think that the progress reports are going to talk about all their reading levels and their math levels and all that, but that's not.
Yeah.
That's
So
not what
how often, if you don't look at that as data, how often do you think that data schools should be taking it? Because those are what, every nine weeks or something?
right.
So how often would you say?
Well, it's just going to depend on the student and the level of the need of the student. Kids who, maybe have 3 or 4 goals on their IEP and they just don't have a lot of challenges, a lot of things going on. Of course, it might be okay to track that kid by pulling some data once a week when the teacher pulls, the small groups for the literacy groups. And so kind of track, okay, how's the student doing? Did they progress on to the next story? Or we're having to spend another week on this story, how are they, if we're talking about reading. But for kids who, spend a portion or majority of their day in a separate setting, a special education classroom, you may need to keep data, every day, especially if we're talking about behaviors. If we have a student who, I'll just reach, self-injurious behavior, we got to be tracking that all the time because we want to make sure that the interventions that we're putting in place is decreasing that behavior. Nobody, no teacher, no parent wants to see their child or their student exhibiting self-injurious behavior. And so we need to be on that one like white on rice. And that behavior needs to be shaped. But we can't do that if we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know if it's getting reinforced inadvertently. Sometimes I'll be in classrooms because I do observations from time to time, and I'll be in a classroom and I will notice something that the teachers do not. And I think a lot of times it's that can't see the forest for the trees, right? They're there every day. This is their room. This is what they do. They're in their rhythm. And sometimes, they're busy with other students. They got a lot of stuff going on. Where when somebody like me is in there, I'm paying attention to a certain thing. And so I see kids' behavior reinforced often. And it's not intentional. But if you don't keep the data, don't often realize that's exactly what's happening. So I just think that, the higher the level of need, particularly behaviorally, the greater the amount of data that you need to keep. I think that I think every parent should have a binder. And I think that they should keep their data that they're gathering in the binder and all their communication that they have with the school. I I like things when they're organized. That's my obsessive compulsive thing. I think sometimes my son will often say things don't have to be perfect. Well, yeah, but they need to get kind of close. So, I like binders. I encourage parents to gather their IEPs together. I know that a lot of schools are just sending them digitally, but you can request the school to send you a hard copy of your IEP, of your psychoeducational evaluations, of your speech and language evaluations, all that stuff you can get hard copies of. And get yourself a nice big thick one of those 3-ring, 3-inch binders. Get one of those. Put a nice cover on it. You can make it pretty easy, just like printing something up, maybe just a picture of your kid. Get one of those binders that have like a little slip-in thing where you put and I'm getting to why I'm saying this. Put your kid's picture, in the little front there. And let me tell you that when I've been to IEP meetings where there's concerns, right? That's oftentimes why parents will call an advocate. And when a parent walks into one of those meetings with a binder that has like particularly their kid's picture on the front, and it's filled with copies of emails, copies of the IEPs, copies of the data, copies of classwork and assignments, and maybe test scores. They can go online and print up the scores that their kids are getting on the tests in school. That can be very compelling.
But I think it also, it helps for future reference, like you said, to maintain records of where your child is. As a physical therapist, I worked for years, for over 20 years, with medically fragile children. So that's my reference point, just for the comment that I'm about to make. My reference point is medically fragile. And for me, and I saw all kinds of diagnoses, not just autism. So coming from that point of reference, you have to where, and I would tell the students that were under my tutelage when I had students from the university, PT students, I would tell them, don't, for us, it's small steps to get to one point, and then all of a sudden regression, right? Because they end up in the hospital for whatever reason. They have a cold, which turns into a complication and whatever, and it's end up in the hospital. So now you have to know where you ended up at. So now you have to, keeping a binder, if you look at it from that point of view, will let you know, where was I? Did I have a regression? Was there a regression? You can go back and forth. And like you said, having that, how do you know that you move forward if you don't have a point of reference from before? How do you know if there was a progress in that goal that was, that you were shooting from, if you didn't know what that goal was? So it's like meeting those medical.
Or something that you had mentioned, Stacey, of like sometimes like seemingly small things in the environment or small things, like if there's like maybe a change in like a nighttime routine, which means like the next day consistently this is happening. That's like all and good information to have.
Yeah, to maintain that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are times when medication will be changed, and teachers don't know about it.
Yep, and it can cause a regression.
Yes, I just had a student just recently who's having all kinds of anxiety, hyperactivity, just a lot of those type of challenges in the classroom. I went over asking the parent different questions and asked, is he on any kind of medication?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the student also has asthma and is on many, many medications. And boy, those particular sets of medication have all kinds of side effects. And increased hyperactivity, increased agitation, increased anxiety. And so it gave us all as a team the aha moment, like, okay, we're going to need to think of this a little bit differently now, because this student,
you have a baseline to compare it to.
Not only that, we have a student who's having some of these challenges, but it's also being affected negatively by medication, that mom needs to now go back to the doctor and say, okay, wait.
This is impacting.
But it was kind of sad that nobody had asked questions that I was asking. So I always tell parents, if you're making a change in medication, if it's a blended family, we got, mom and dad and then another mom and dad and different siblings in different homes, and that stuff is hard on all kids. And so being able to make sure that if those things change, there's data on it, but also sharing that information with the educators so that they can kind of approach student a little bit differently during times that may be more emotional for that child.
Well, we have to move on because we have a lot of content. Olivia?
Yeah, so I know you had mentioned.
We could be here forever.
So I know you had mentioned just a little while ago now about test scores. So obviously they can be kind of a helpful data point for the team, but what advice would you give to parents or caregivers when reviewing those test scores before an IEP meeting?
Well, I would always let my teachers know in advance, like soon as I knew they were my teacher, my son's teacher, I would say, I'm just letting you know, I'm gonna want to look at data because I wanted them prepared, and nobody likes to be caught off guard. So if you're like me and you are gonna want to see data, just let them know in advance. Don't get agitated and then be like, I want to see the data. Nothing good is gonna come out of that. So just letting them know in advance that you want to see it. Now, the schools are required, if you read your IEP document, I'm not even talking about what's written in there or that's about your kid, the actual document, it says assessments, right? Assessments that were used to write this IEP. I find some IEPs, there are no assessments. There's not even any documented. And I'll look at that section and it's blank. So parents, if your standard operating procedure of your school is not to give you a draft of the IEP in advance, ask for one. Way back many years ago, when my son was young, there was no drafts, but I would ask for one because I would sit over there on that couch and I would read it after he was in bed when the house was kind of quiet so that I can kind of focus. Because waiting to look at the data, to look at, those scores that should be documented in your present level of performance, in a time in an IEP meeting when you don't have any frame of reference from like reading it before in just like a moment of silence can be really hard. Sometimes I'll go to IEP meetings and, kids are kids. So sometimes we'll walk in and the teacher will say, oh my goodness, Joey had a really rough morning this morning. And of course, mom's brain goes to, oh my goodness, what happened? Oh, wait. Oh yeah. When he was in the car, oh, he didn't eat breakfast. And whoosh, it's really hard for a parent to pay attention then in a really important meeting when they've just learned that their child had a rough morning. So don't allow that to happen to you. You want to know that stuff in advance so that you're prepared, so that if there's a blip that morning, you're okay. And you know that the good things that you wanted to find out or to offer, you're already got your notes and you're ready to go. Now, the assessments, I just happen to like reading and math, right? So the diagnostic assessment of reading, I like that assessment. It's not a good indicator as to if your kid's going to pass the FAST or the old FSA, but I like it because it breaks reading down into 5 different components. And some kids are going to do better on word recognition than on silent reading comprehension. And I like goals to be really just rock solid, pinpointed on certain topics. And so you shouldn't have a goal on the IEP that says that, Karen's going to improve her reading comprehension with 80% accuracy. From what to what? Where was Karen at before? Where do we want to get Karen to be now? What's going to take? What's the given in the goal? What do we have to give Karen in order for her to make the achievement? So, that's another reason that we have to have data, because if we don't have data, we don't know where we're stepping from. So if you don't know where you're stepping from, how do you know what you're going to get to? And, sadly, many kids, because I pull, when I have a client who has been with me before, and I pull out last year's IEP, and I look at this year's, it's the same thing. You don't want that to be. If you have, my belief is, if you have data and everybody's considering the data on at least a quarterly basis, I'd like it a little bit more frequently. I think that, we should be looking at it either ongoing or at least monthly. But, if you don't feel like you don't need to do that, then look at it quarterly. Because, and I don't think that a lot of, maybe even teachers know this, that when a student has IEP goals that are not being mastered, they're not. It's just something maybe they think, well, maybe that goal is a little too lofty. I don't know, for whatever the reason is. They're not supposed to just let that goal lay there stagnant and then in a year's time come back together and go, well, he didn't master the goal. When it's recognized that a goal is not being mastered in the way that it was written or intended, somebody should call an interim IEP. So that could be the parent, could be the school. Since the teachers are really keeping the data on the school side, I'd like it to be the school to call the mom and say, I don't know, not making much progress on this goal. So let's come together. We'll talk about this goal, put our heads together and kind of figure out what we're missing. And so you have to be able to have that in order to move forward. And you do not ever want to see same IEP year after year. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've had kids start with me at 3 years old and graduate out. And it does happen where the levels of the student will remain kind of flatlined. And you had shared before about working with complex kids physically. I do not only work with kids on the autism spectrum. I have kids on G-tubes and respirators who use wheelchairs to get around, who have a lot of medical and life challenges, kids whose families don't know how much longer they have with them. And those doesn't matter to me who the kid is. I believe, and I have seen it, that all students, no matter what, can make progress.
Mhm.
But it depends upon the team that's around them. And that includes the parent, and the teachers, the therapists, and everybody to work collaboratively to come up with what's the next step we want to get to and how are we going to do it. And I've been really fortunate. I've seen some amazing outcomes and I've seen some that are heartbreaking. And so use the data so that you can have the best outcome that your child, who can be an adult one day, and believe me, they're going to be an adult a lot longer, they're going to be a child. And so those decisions that are made during the school years, they affect them, their lifetime. So we want to get it as right as we can, knowing that, nobody's perfect, mess some stuff up. That's okay. And you just regroup and go, okay, what's next? Hopefully that
Thank you.
answers.
That was really helpful, Stacey. And, earlier you mentioned, having those supports and having like a paraprofessional for your son in the classroom. And sometimes we have districts that may not have the staffing to provide the paras for the students. If there's, due to school staff shortages, the IEP is not able to be implemented as it was originally agreed upon, what would you recommend doing? Do you have any ideas for equivalent supports or other ways parents and the school can work together to resolve this?
Well, when I'm sitting at meetings and the school says, we're short staffed and we have all these issues, I let them know that we understand. We get it. Both myself and the parent, we understand it. But those challenges are not owned by the parent. They're not the responsibility of the parent. So a parent can be understanding. If the parent chooses to give them some time, they can. But the law is really clear. And even when COVID began and everybody was kind of freaked out, right? We didn't know what was going to happen and schools were shut down. There was nothing ever in IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that said, okay, well, for as long as this is going to take, we don't have to give you FAPE, right? Free and appropriate public education. Never. And there have been kids across this nation who have got a boatload of compensatory education because their school that they attended did not give them services, special education during that time. So I'm pretty confident that if our government, who basically, oversees our laws and the education system, didn't allow schools to use COVID as a reason to not provide services, they're probably not going to allow this reason for not providing services. Schools can get creative. I unfortunately handle a lot of due process cases. Mostly, almost all of them actually, over the last, more than 20 years, they don't get to a judge. We have resolution meetings, and I really like the resolution process because it really puts the key players at the table, the people who can make those decisions. And when they put their heads together, my experience is that they come up with some other options. A lot of times there are people at the school. Maybe they need to look at the schedule. Oh, we got Miss Karen, she's here and then she's there, but oh, we have this break over here and we can have her fill the room. I've had some schools, when it comes to paraprofessionals, they'll hire substitutes. They don't like to because it's more money, and I get that. But if you have a student who the school may be saying, well, we can't give you the least restrictive environment for your student of a regular classroom because we don't have a paraprofessional, that's going to get you in trouble. So we don't, we prefer not to have schools in trouble. We prefer kids to actually get what's on their IEP in the least restrictive environment, which is different for every kid, right? Some kids, the least restrictive environment is a regular education classroom all day, every day. Some kids it's not. So it's, it's different for every kid. But if the student needs to have that support in order to access that and their education, school is required to provide it. When it comes to services, because I know that a lot of areas are having a huge problem with speech language pathologists and not having enough. I've had cases where the school system, they're honest, we don't have any. We don't know what we're gonna do. Some of them will actually just pay for a private provider, and the parent will take their child to the private provider in the afternoons after school. I've also had just a recent case where the district was paying their speech pathologist that they have during the school day after hours to work with kids in aftercare. So I'm just telling you that when a parent brings forth that concern and sometimes reminds the school that my kid is not getting the services outlined in their IEP. And
So that reminds me of a question. So what are some things that maybe parents don't realize that that they can ask for when it comes to the IEP? Since we're in this line of conversation.
Well, the number one thing is inclusion. And like I said, I'm a huge believer in inclusion. I will definitely say my best outcome kids, knowing that I've had them from 3 and been with the family all those years and the kid leaves, are kids who were included in regular ed. Maybe not all day, but that they had access to it. And so many times parents sit at IEP meetings, like even coming out of preschool. So the kid comes out of preschool and the team is sitting there going, okay, well, this is, we're going to place them in this program without any discussion of the least restrictive environment with whatever support that student needs. And sometimes it takes somebody like me to say, okay, guys, we're supposed to start our discussion with regular education and then work back if we need to. We're not supposed to go right for, segregated education. That's not where we're supposed to start. Do some kids end up there because of their level of need? And if the IEP team agrees, yeah, sure, they do, of course. That's not supposed to be the conversation. And I'm going to kind of go back to really complex kids. Some of my most complex kids, and I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, she's crazy, are awesome in regular ed because they're surrounded by typical kids who can talk to them. And I have this one girl, they want to do her hair and do her fingernails and talk to her constantly, the other girls in her class, where if she was in that separate classroom with other kids who have similar challenges to her, there wouldn't be peers wanting to paint her fingernails and talk to her about hair. It's not, it is what it is. And so I always remind every IEP team, when we talk about special education, it's not supposed to be a place, it's a service. So where can that service be provided? And then we kind of figure out, like if they say, well, Stacey, he or she needs to go into this program. Okay, why? What is it about that program, that classroom over there that they cannot get in the regular classroom? Let's kind of tease that out. And oftentimes there's not a great answer to that. Now, I have to remind families a lot that, if the students' needs are so significant that their behaviors usually, that's one of the things that's pretty challenging when it comes to inclusion. If their behavior is negatively affecting the learning of the students around them, then, we have to look at that as well, because we don't want a child to be in a regular classroom having behaviors where the other kids are going to be like, oh, I don't want to play with him or her. So we do need to shape and really work on those things. but the best role models are going to be typically developing kids who have good social and communication skills, especially when we're talking about kids for autism. And so that's like one of the big things is just making sure that parents understand that they can get really creative again, co-teaching. They can spend a portion of their day, all day, whatever, in regular ed, but a lot of times it is not brought up, sometimes at all. So the next one kind of goes along with that one, and it's the question related to being on or off standards. Kids who have been, so there's a little bit of a process of removing a student from regular standards. It's an exemption process. And there was, it used to be a score, they had to have an IQ score of 69, and there were some other parameters. Now the state changed that just last year. So now it's 67. So 67 is that magic number when it comes to IQ. I caution everybody with that number. However, we know that kids with disabilities don't test well, and it's actually rare that I would actually see what I think is a real like IQ score that's a good picture of who a kid is, because it just doesn't normally work that way. Anyway, you have to have the 67 or IQ. Should not be having that conversation to exempt a student before second grade. So your kid shouldn't come into kindergarten and already be exempt from regular standards. So a lot of times this conversation is for my older kids. So the kids who, the team decided kid met the criteria to be exempt, they're exempt. So therefore they're going to be in special ed. That's not necessarily true. Students who are exempt from regular standards could be in regular ed all day, even with a modified curriculum. So that means the curriculum can be modified down to where the student can be successful in that environment with whatever support, could be a paraprofessional or not. I mean, I have some kids who might have, make the standards for being exempt from standardized testing, but don't require someone to be there with them all the time. So it just varies. But a lot of parents do not realize that their kids can be in regular ed, even if they're not taking the FAST. And like I said before, role models. The role models are going to be in the regular setting. So I always, recommend that everybody kind of start with that. I want to just add, I had a student, well, I was at an IEP meeting.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the parent input section as well, kind of because I feel like that's something I've heard from families too, they're not really knowing or they not really understanding, I guess, like the full use of it.
Okay. All right, so another thing is the parent input section of the IEP. A lot of times when I look at an IEP, that's already done. So it's not in draft form, it's done. That parent input section, which oftentimes I'd say, because I see IEPs from across the country, it's usually on the front page. But if it's not on the front page, it's pretty close to it. A lot of times it's blank, or it'll say NA, or it'll say parent agrees with what's written in this IEP. Generally speaking, if they have accessed an advocate, they're not in total agreement with everything. And so parents need to realize that that place is your opportunity to put whatever it is that you want to have documented. And that could be, like, I think it's really good to provide in that section anything that you're doing. So for me, my son also, so he has autism, but he also has dyscalculia, which means that math was a bear, an absolute bear. So I would always put in that section that I was working with him for whatever it was, from year to year it would change, but an hour a day, that if I hired a tutor, I would put that in there. He received occupational therapy and speech and language therapy all the way through school, privately. I put that in there because I wanted the school to realize that I appreciated what they were doing, but we were working really hard outside of school as well. That's also in that section is where you want to put your concerns. If you don't feel like your child is mastering their goals, if you don't feel like they're making the progress that they could or they should, you want to make sure that you have that documented there, because you know that there's that saying, it's not written down, it wasn't said, it wasn't discussed. And most of the time, when you're sitting there at the meeting and they say to you, okay, so what's your parent input? What would you like to put? That person is typing, right? And you're talking. Well, you guys talk really fast, like me. So you're talking. So that person, unless they're like a super good stenographer, chances are good they're not capturing everything. So I just like to suggest that towards the end of the meeting, usually they'll say, is there anything else, you'd like to offer, or any other concerns you have? Can we go back to that parent input section? I just want to just make sure that, we got everything captured in there, because I do not believe that, I oftentimes, when they do come back to it, we don't see the way it was intended, especially when we have a person who's doing the typing, who's maybe English is their primary language, and the family member with a different language that's their primary. Because a lot of times things kind of get misinterpreted, and the person typing could think that mom or dad meant something, and that is not what they meant at all. So being able to make sure that you go back to that, and just make sure that it is what you want it to be. Because if there's a time where, you're like exhausted as a parent, and you just are really not happy, and you want to read your procedural safeguards to figure out what can I do, because I have all these concerns. You want to make sure that your concerns are documented in the IEP itself, and that is your section. And they, as a school, cannot tell you that you cannot put something in that section. You can say, I want the walls all painted blue because Johnny does great with blue walls. They have to type that there. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get blue walls.
Okay.
But that just means that you documented that Johnny was really good. So I don't want you guys to think that if you put it in that section, they got to do it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you think that Johnny needs speech and language therapy 5 times a week, 30 minutes a day, because he has a very intensive and pervasive language disorder as part of his disability, then you document that in there. That's what you feel as his parent that he needs, and the reason why. It's good. And I will tell you also that a lot of times when you document something like that in there, the team will go, okay, wait, let's talk about this. And where maybe the door seemed a little shut before, kind of opens back up, because no school wants to not have a good working relationship with the parent. And if your input gives them an inkling that, something might be going off the tracks here a little bit, chances are really good they're going to want to bring it back on. Then we'll open up the conversation some more for you guys, so that you feel the meeting feeling really good about where you are. The one other thing I want to say is, and it kind of goes to this, parents, you can have multiple IEP meetings every year. Now, I don't think it's great to go crazy with IEP meetings, but if your school says to you, well, you get one meeting a year. Well, you get one annual meeting a year. Yes, they have to have the annual IEP meeting, but I encourage you to have at least one interim. For my son, his annual was in May, and I liked it at that time of year, because I had a teacher writing the IEP that really knew my kid, just spent almost the whole year with him, was really good and set to go. And then we would have one probably like around December-ish. But I would always meet with them before the school year began to talk about who he was, what the student, like who is Stacey Hoaglund and what his needs were. And I would create something called the Day in the Life, that was like a 1 or 2 page document that kind of explained who he is, so that they could get a feel for who he is. And so it's a misnomer if somebody tells you that you can't have more than 1 meeting a year. You can. And I just want to add one more, is that you do have the right to observe your kids in school. And I find, especially through partners in policymaking, a lot of my students in that class will tell me that their school district, and we get people from across the state, will tell me that they said no observations. You have the right to observe your child in school in order to help you become a better representative for your child at the IEP meetings. You don't get to just go in there and hang out. That's not the intent. The intent is so that you—
Those are great points.
Yes,
Yeah.
Have information that you need so that when you sit there at the meeting, you got it. You understand when the teacher says that this is happening or that's happening. Now you know because you saw it with your own eyes and you can relate better to the teacher. You can advocate for your child in by having more information. If all you're depending upon is maybe some homework or some classwork that comes home, and maybe you're seeing data, maybe you're not, I don't know. But when you get your eyes on them, like, oh, wow, okay, now I understand what Miss Smith's been telling me. And I get it, some kids it's hard for a parent to observe. My teachers in elementary school, it was
I'm
kind
gonna
of
have to interrupt you because we have to go. We're
Okay.
way past our time, but we want to thank you. We want to tell our audience we're going to be sharing your information, all your information and everything, all your contact information in this comment section below. Your fountain of information where they can reach you. And so thank you, and also want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here, for bringing all this information, all this content. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, Olivia, for contacting you. Oh my God, what a resource. Thank you. We are way past our time. So thank our audience also for joining us. And also wanted to remind our audience that if they have any comments or questions, we'll make sure that we make them forward them to you, because we are going to be also in December and on the 16th, going to be talking about organizational skills, how to make that binder. So we're going to be touching base with you on some recommendations on how to make that binder, some of your recommendations on how to make that a wonderful binder for the families to be able to keep everything in there for their meetings. So right,
data collection doesn't have to be scary, guys.
No, it doesn't. No. But again, thank you for being here, Stacey. Unfortunately, we have to go. We have to keep it down. But for those of you who are here today, again, if you have any questions and any comments, if you're watching us after we get off the air, just go ahead and give us your questions, your comments. We'll make sure we forward them to Stacey. We'll leave you all her contact information where you can find her, so she can answer your questions directly and all that. And thank you again, Stacey, for being here. If you have any last minute words to say to the audience.
Just that Florida has some really great resources. We have, of course, CARD, throughout the state. We have the Family Care Councils, the Center for Independent Living, Disability Rights Florida. So I don't want anybody to feel alone, because we're really lucky. We have some really great resources. So make sure that you reach out other families or any of these organizations, and there's always people to help.
Yes, thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you. And again, come back on the 16th. We'll be here to tell you how to get those binders completed. All right. That gets us to the end of the show. Don't forget, but before we go, please don't forget to fill out that survey that we are going to be putting on the comment section. This is the way that we can justify the time that it takes us to be in the air with you, to put this kind of programming together for you. So please, you know that this is how we justify it, even if you've done it before. So thank you. And don't forget to give us a like, share this video with people that you know can benefit from this kind of information, and be sure to meet us here every other Friday at 10:45 a.m. And so we can share a cup of coffee with you, and we can spill the beans with you on topics important to autism. All right, until then, we wish you good vibes and hot coffee. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.